Reality and fiction. Two opposite dimensions occupying the same space in our world. Reality being what we perceive with our senses, the stimuli that are commonly agreed upon to exist. The sky above and the ground below. These are indisputable fact. Fiction acts as that opposite, the playground of the mind where any and everything can go. The sky can be full of cats and dogs raining down to the earth, situations of impossibility that could never occur otherwise. These two independent concepts work side by side, with reality giving way to fiction. Human beings coming up with all sorts of stories as far back as history can record them. Tall tales that inspire, fantasy stories that bring on flights of imagination, and somber tragedies that leave readers with a sense of sadness. With all the possibility that a story can hold, let's fast forward to the year 2017. New Danganronpa V3, everyone's new semester of killing, released to Japanese audiences. Later in that same year, it was released to the global crowd under the title Danganronpa V3, Killing Harmony. Acting as the third and, as of now, final entry in the main Danganronpa series, high expectations were set. Fans across the world hadn't received a new mainline entry since 2012. Promotion for the game was mysterious, teasing a new, psycho-cool environment and feel for the game. New aspects such as the Scrum debate and the inclusion of Monokuma's children heightened the excitement for the game. Among the new features, the ability to lie was highlighted. The ability to deceive your classmates in order to redirect the trials added extra weight to the already stress-inducing class trials, as now it was possible to hold more power over dialogue, paving the way to new routes of dialogue and giving players more agency. So, once V3 dropped for audiences to play through, discussion began online amongst the fans. Some held high praise for the game, pointing to the narrative and characters as being the strongest that the series has ever had, with others admonishing it, saying that the title was a waste of their time and even made some players feel guilty. Important things to mention were the game's notably darker tone and heavy focus on generating tension and suspense. Out of everything in V3, the biggest contender among these fans was the ending of the game. Even with those who felt that V3 was an improvement compared to its predecessors, there was a constant back and forth with regard to the conclusion. 5 years on, these arguments continue with such a large divide among those who have experienced V3. Within the runtime of this game, Danganronpa V3 works to deceive not just its characters, but the players as well. Subverting expectations fans may have held for the game, but doing so in a graceful and exceptional way. Transforming what Danganronpa means and opening it up for the audience to explore. Throughout V3, there is a beautiful story being told that captures themes of what the line is between truth and lies. A story that examines the relationship fiction has on its audiences and reality as a whole. All while maintaining the same frenetic pace and colorfulness that the series is known for. Danganronpa V3 is a game full of twists and turns with, in my opinion, a perfect conclusion. One that shifts perspectives and viewpoints between the final members who lived through everything up until now, embodying their desperation and hope. A climactic battle of words and clashing ideals befitting the series. An ending that is not just perfect for this entry, but the series at large. Now, before we get to the deeper dive on what makes V3's ending as perfect as it is, I want to throw the spoiler warning out here. Obvious as it may be, but there will be heavy spoilers for the majority of Danganronpa V3, which, by extension, has spoilers for Danganronpa 1 and 2. If you've played the game or don't mind the spoilers, then stick around. But for those who want to avoid them, now is a great time to click away and come back later. As for everyone else, let's begin to investigate Danganronpa V3's perfect ending. To begin understanding what makes V3's ending perfect, we have to start at the beginning. Right from the start of the game, the mystery of V3 makes itself clear. Players are first shown Kaede and Shuichi, both of whom have no idea where they are. This location is hectic, resembling a classroom with overgrown foliage and strange technology. Despite both being incredibly shaken up, they begin to leave the room to be promptly chased down by enormous mechs mounted with weaponry. Once they finally outrun these mechanical beasts, they reach the gym where the mechs reveal themselves to be piloted by the Monokubs, the apparent children of the titular Monokuma. 5 of them, each sporting a different color. They pose an odd question after a bit of back and forth banter, asking if the students remember their talents, to which they reply they don't. It is said that the mind-altering is not quite done, and ominous things are mentioned casually, such as the ultimate hunt, and how they're not following the script. After receiving their new, recognizable outfits, the students are hit with something called a flashback light, and the opening reboots. This time, the students are able to recall their abilities and appear a lot less shaken up. Instead of being fearful like before, Kaede is able to keep her composure while making cute little references to iconic piano tunes. These subtle hints point towards something not being quite right without directly saying it, going as far to wink at the players to indicate that something is wrong. Eventually, Monokuma makes his appearance where he announces the killing game and all the procedures that will be common knowledge to longtime fans of the franchise. Following this, the first chapter starts as players begin to get acquainted. During the time players explore their surroundings and the story of the game opens, more questions begin to build up. These mysteries dangle above the player's head, piling on top of each other. Questions such as what the status of the outside world is, the ambiguity surrounding memory, and why a flashback light is needed. In addition to these, the mystery is built upon even further through the opening of each chapter. Mysterious sequences play out with no context given, sending the enigma of V3 further into madness. What helps these mysteries play out, as well as justifying the twist of the ending, is the promise V3 makes at its very beginning. In fiction, a story makes a promise to its viewer. This promise is essentially the first mystery of any story and encapsulates what will be expected from the story. It poses questions that will be answered by the end of the story. In the case of Danganronpa V3, the core issues are the circumstances of the killing game and who is responsible for it. The promise is fulfilled in the game's closing chapter. The promise of a story is important when it comes to complaints directed at it. Often, when an ending is disappointing or poorly executed, it can be chalked up to these promises not being fulfilled. Danganronpa V3's ending meets these introductory problems and answers all of them. It may be argued that the promise is broken due to the twist at the end. However, this is untrue. The twist merely adds layers to the answer that was given. It doesn't remove the answer in its entirety. Let's take a look again at the story prior to the ending. Upon a second playthrough, a lot becomes apparent that wasn't to the first-time player. V3 uses foreshadowing to prepare players for the subversion of the ending, as it spent a good amount of time establishing the core theme of the game. These hints are hidden just well enough that they may be missed on the first playthrough, but that's the beauty of V3's storytelling. Right from the start, with the opening playing out twice, with the Monokubs even stating that things aren't right as the script isn't being followed. Monofani is confronted for not finishing things as she was supposed to, in clear reference to the memory replacement not being complete. Other elements give it away as well, with the last chapter using them as evidence, such as the bugs that Gonta examined. These bugs seemed out of place due to the plot telling players that they're on the moon away from Earth, though, as it turned out, these weren't bugs at all. They were miniature Monokumas wielding cameras to record every moment of the killing game. Even the introduction of the game presents itself the way a television program would, with Team Danganronpa being credited. Why a fair amount of these examples of foreshadowing likely go unnoticed on the first run is due to how previous Danganronpa titles played out. With them, fourth wall breaking was a common gag that either Monokuma or the cast would make. In those games, it's nothing more than a one-off joke, but here, it goes much deeper. The game encourages its players to truly take in everything that they're seeing and think about it. Attention to detail is key. In keeping with the mention of the foreshadowing, it's time to look at another aspect of V3 that supports its ending: the subversion of expectations. Generally, when this phrase is brought up, a symphony of groans and head-shaking is to follow. And while it is common that this can be done poorly, it is done with grace in V3. What aids V3 in its grand finale is this subversion, and how the game works to deceive its audience. Some players like to point at the ending and claim that it came out of left field, but this claim is easily refuted. Danganronpa V3 not only led to this ending using the foreshadowing and mystery as mentioned previously, it eased its players in, only to pull the rug from beneath them. As far back as the first chapter of the game. The way the first chapter is laid out is unique compared to the previous games. Some aspects are similar, such as the characters initially trying to band together to figure out the truth of their surroundings. However, others are starkly different with the addition of the Monocubs and the attitude of the player character, Kaede. Kaede is bold and takes initiative among her peers. Right off the bat, she takes up the leadership role unlike Makoto and Hajime, who tended to favor the background, letting others do the heavy lifting. During her time in the spotlight, she does her best to organize the mutual efforts of the class, but this is cut short due to the timer set by the Monocubs. Over the course of the first trial, arguments are thrown back and forth until it is revealed that Kaede herself was the culprit. As a result, Kaede is executed, as the perspective now shifts to Shuichi. The end of Chapter 1 actively destroys any preconceived notions, killing the player character outright. This completely disrupts what could be considered the typical formula for the Danganronpa series, as well as leaving players ready for anything to occur next. Could Shuichi be the killer of the chapter to come, with a new player character for each chapter? Are we able to trust anything that we are shown? This subversion sets the tone for the rest of the game to come, as it now leaves players in a state of unease when navigating the plot. Though, slowly, things begin to adjust themselves as Shuichi asserts himself as the protagonist, and events unfold in a somewhat typical fashion for Danganronpa. Elements such as a double murder in the third chapter and bonds being formed amongst characters ease players back to normalcy, with the main things on their mind being the murders that occur and must be solved. Thus, when that final reveal is made and the pieces line up in the final chapter, players don't just have the rug pulled from beneath them, but the very carpet that lines the room. All of these lingering questions that have players doubting everything play perfectly into one of the core themes for V3, the duality of truth and lies. The very subversion of expectation by placing players in familiar surroundings only to slowly reveal the reality of the situation, searching for what the truth is amidst a sea of lies. Even the cast recognize these bizarre patterns of the game they've been put in, with some forming their own theories on how to make it out or beat the game. With Rantaro having access to the Survivor's perk, and Oma doing his own intense research on everything around him, trying to outwit the mastermind to bring them out. Each of these strengthen the theme of truth versus lies and supplement the ending. One last aspect of the subversion within V3 is that it challenges the players. As the other Danganronpa games do, V3 also requires that involvement from its players. In a similar fashion to the other games, V3 requires a certain degree of involvement from its players. These surprises throughout the plot are unexpected, but line up with the right context. V3 just asks that players keep their eyes open and look for these clues. Going back and taking the first and last chapter as an example, we see the game itself reapproach the first case during the final class trial. Shuichi and the remaining students are able to once again go over the circumstances of what occurred between Rantaro and Kaede. As the events are recontextualized, it leads to a brilliant moment of clarity as the truth comes out. V3 subverts expectations by setting up the familiar formula, only to cut away and ask, is everything truly as it seems? Now that we've covered everything that came before, it's time to look at the ending in its entirety. Coming off the heels of the emotional and chaotic conclusion to Chapter 5, we're shown that Kibo has lost his inner voice and has now made the decision to destroy the ultimate academy for gifted juveniles, believing this is the only way to prevent despair from spreading. But just before this, we're shown yet another one of the confusing prologues to each chapter. A boy introduces himself as Makoto, a name we're all familiar with by now. And much like our Makoto, he's an ordinary boy who found himself in an elite academy surrounded by gifted people. But unlike the protagonist of Danganronpa, This Makoto isn't in the midst of a killing game. Rather, he's living a mundane life that seems to be made much better by something. Something that we don't know. This, once again, clues players at something bigger being at play here. Jumping back, Shuichi and the others are able to convince Kibo to halt his path of destruction until dawn. Shuichi believes that he's close to uncovering the truth of everything thus far, and even alludes to there being some kind of audience, following the breadcrumb trail that Oma left behind. Little does he know that this audience is not composed of mysterious figures who work to spread despair, but average, everyday people. Once an agreement is made, Kibo goes to face off with the Exisouls and Monokuma, leaving the rest of the survivors to do some sleuth work. Cutting from this, the chapter title is revealed, Goodbye, Danganronpa, a title that has a much deeper meaning than a simple farewell to the players, acting as a catalyst for the big reveal that is soon to come. During the time spent investigating, Shuichi begins to piece together inconsistencies, strange things that stick out, such as the book that contains the history of Hope's Peak Academy, and the computer that creates flashback lights. Other noteworthy discoveries aid in ramping up the mystery. Rantaro's talent lab reveals that his talent was the ultimate survivor, and he had survived a previous killing game, which is odd, as players will note that this character has never appeared until this game. The Survivor's perk, which gave him hints and a full map of the school, give more clarity on his odd behavior and attitude towards the beginning of the game. Rantaro knew something that the others didn't, and this bothered Shuichi. At one point during the lead-up to the trial, Shuichi explores Oma's room and comes across various pieces of evidence that imply Oma was also trying to end the killing game. Which would be strange if it were true that he was a remnant of despair. The biggest giveaway that something was amiss was the discovery of Oma's motive video. This video shows that Kokichi's organization was nothing more than a group of petty punks who pulled off pranks. The most substantial finding was the hidden room where the mastermind observed the game. The same room that concealed the Mother Kuma, which is responsible for creating the bears. In this room, Shuichi leaves no stone unturned, and in doing so, found the evidence he needed to commit to a retrial. He determines that in order to unmask the mastermind, it's imperative to re-go over the first trial, the case of Kaede and Rantaro. Once this trial gets underway, the game begins to take an even darker turn, with Monokuma and his children participating, acting as barriers to redirect Shuichi away from the truth. Relentlessly berating Shuichi and calling the evidence he has pointless, and stating constantly that no matter what, the killing game will never end. Notably, not just during this trial, but the moments leading up to it, Tsumugi keeps trying to divert Shuichi's attention to conceal something. In exposing the truth behind Rantaro's murder and deducing that no one else could have been the mastermind, Shuichi calls out Tsumugi to explain herself. After this, she begins to snap and try to once again redirect everyone's attention. She parades herself as Junko Enoshima and claims that nobody but Junko could be responsible for this killing game. Due to the excellent detective work of Shuichi, aided by Maki and Himiko, he is able to see through her lies. However, once he does this, Tsumugi decides to pull the curtain back and make the reveal that he's right. Everything has been inconsistent. Monokuma did break the rules. Everything up to this point has been a lie. Hope's Peak Academy was a story, the same one players would be familiar with. Everything was nothing more than fiction. All carefully coordinated for the sake of entertainment. The ultimate, real fiction. First important thing I'd like to make note of before we continue is that were V3 not intended to be the final game in this series, then the twist simply wouldn't work as well as it did. This conclusion brings the thrill and excitement of Danganronpa to new levels, raising the stakes by bringing the game beyond the boundary of fiction. V3 examines the franchise as a whole through a meta-narrative lens, and this is only possible if this entry acts as the ending to the series. Or at least, the ending for the foreseeable future. Who knows what Kodaka is cooking. V3 jumps back and looks at the series in its entirety, asking players to question concepts such as hope and despair and what they have come to stand for. asking if continuing the series forever is a feasible and good option. Using the faces of the previous characters to reinforce this overarching feeling of finality, while also making the exposition more exciting and haunting. V3 does all of this while paying respect to the games that have came before it. As I mentioned previously, the two central themes of Danganronpa V3 are encapsulated wonderfully during this finale. These being the duality of truth and lies, and the effects that media can have on its consumers. By bringing Danganronpa beyond a game series and turning it into something even greater and more extreme, both these topics are able to be dealt with, showcasing the drastic heights that people will climb in order to create entertainment for an audience. This blends with the other theme, due to the killing game being both parts reality and fiction. Lies can be just as real as the truth in regard to the effects they hold on real life. A lie can have just as strong an impact, thus why fiction, which is typically seen as a lie, can hold such power over us. As V3 pulls the curtain back on its characters, it also pulls it back on its players, revealing a mirror as Shuichi and company bear witness to the real world of the game actively commenting on the trial as it's going on. Faces of various people appear in the background of the trial, different from the anime-styled characters of the game. Faces of average, real-life people line the screen. This works to unsettle the player, while also creating a parallel between player and audience. Both the stimuli of seeing real faces mixed with the characters of the game and the reason behind why they are there generate a truly disturbing feeling. A dissonance. The very same audience who is rooting for and against the cast look no different than the ones occupying the real world with controller in hand. Looking closer at these two themes, let's first go over truth and lies. Danganronpa V3 focuses less on the moral dilemma of truth and lies, but more on the duality of the two. How a lie can be just as real as the truth, and how both can be used for the same goal. A lie can become the truth, just as the truth can be nothing more than a lie. The dual nature of lies is best seen through the dynamic of Shuichi Saihara and Kokichi Oma. One seeks the truth through proper means, while the other seeks the truth through manipulation and lies. V3 is able to examine this duality and showcase the fine line between the two through these characters. Shuichi acts with ethics, only utilizing lies in dire situations during class trials. Meanwhile, Oma is not afraid of taking risks and exploiting others in order to reach his goal. The best example to demonstrate this duality is by looking at each character's approach to unmasking the mastermind. Oma, throughout the game, trying and failing subsequently to unveil the mastermind. After each failure, his attempts only grew in risk, leading to his penultimate sacrifice during Chapter 5. Wherein he makes a deal with Kaito in order to utilize a lie to bring out the mastermind by ruining the killing game for its audience. A lie where Oma appeared to be the one who died, while he was operating an exisal during the class trial. Having Kaito play the role of the pseudo-Oma, the plan which is based on a lie was used for the goal of uncovering the truth. Ultimately, this plan failed, leaving Shuichi to put all his effort during one last attempt to end the game and bring out the mastermind. By employing every one of his detective skills, as well as using the cooperation of his friends, barring Tsumugi, who conveniently throws up false flags during this time, Shuichi is able to reveal the truth without the use of lies. Notably, during this final trial, there is no chance to utilize a lie. Shuichi exposes the truth through the use of solely the truth. When it comes to this same duality, it can be applied to the truth behind the cast of this game. As it is revealed, Shuichi and the others have been made up. Fake identities and backstories for the purpose of the game. This truth contrasts with the lie that they've been living. During the game, we see these characters and their hardships form bonds and work together. Even if their past is erased, these new existences are just as valid and real. This is laid bare during the final trial as Maki decides to give up her life to end the game, with Shuichi stating,
さっき春川さんが犠牲になるって言ったとき、僕は思ったんだ。なんで今まで散々仲間を犠牲にしてきて、ここで春川さんまで犠牲にしないといけないんだって。 なんで赤松さんや桃太くんを失った時の悲しみをまた繰り返さなくちゃいけないのかって。なんで僕らはあんな思いを繰り返さなくちゃいけないんだって。なんで僕らはこんな辛い思いをしなくちゃいけないんだって。いくら外の世界が求めているからって僕はもうあんな思いはしたくない。誰にもさせたくない。この世界がフィクションだとしても、僕ら自身がフィクションだとしても、この胸の痛みは本物だ。仲間を失った悲しみは本物なんだ。僕らの命をもてあそぶ殺し合いを僕は絶対に許さない。外の世界がそれを求めているというのなら、僕は世界を否定する。僕らの悲しみや痛みを見せ物にしている世界と戦う。
Thus proving that everything they've felt, everything they've lived through, is simultaneously both a lie and the truth. During this, Shuichi also shoots down the false pretenses that come with the ongoing battle between hope and despair. V3 juxtaposes this theme from the past titles with truth and lies, showcasing the hypocrisy at play within V3 as hope has different definitions. What hope would mean for the audience would be based on their fake expectations, ensuring that the killing game would go on forever. While hope for the cast of the game would be to escape and live their lives away from this tragedy. The same goes for despair, as this is also founded on a lie. What the audience takes as despair is shock value and meant to be overcame. If Shuichi, Kibo, and the others were to perpetuate the cycle of hope versus despair, the killing would be allowed to continue. Simply choosing someone to lose this game would not be enough to bring it to an end. Moving on, let's now examine the way that Danganronpa V3 works with its theme of fiction and reality. By having the truth of V3's killing game be a product of obsession and passion, the game is able to demonstrate the relationship people in our world have with fiction. Fiction influences reality the same way reality influences fiction. One couldn't exist without the other. Tsumugi, as well as Team Danganronpa, were clearly inspired by the original stories of 1 and 2 to create a perfect replication of the killing game. Side note, but there may have been more games than 1 and 2. It's not explicit how many were fictional up until real fiction took place. But considering Tsumugi refers to 1 and 2 as the Hope's Peak arc, I'm sure that there have been more games in their universe before the killing took place. I don't know, I just thought that implication was neat. Anyways. And this mingles with many fascinating examples that exist in our world of people taking stories too far or performing extreme acts just for the sake of entertainment. It's important to note that this theme and reveal are not meant to mock or parallel the fans of the Danganronpa game series. Though the audience in-game may say things similar to the real-life fans, they're clearly meant to stand in as representation to the world at large. Consumer culture focused on getting their kicks in regardless of the cost. Take programs such as My 900-Pound Life or Hoarders, reality television that exists at the cost of those involved. General audiences at home become enthralled with these types of shows, being able to point and laugh while sitting comfortably in the seat of their couch. V3 asks the question, how far are we willing to go for this entertainment? I'd like to point out the similarity between this message of V3 and a real-world theory known as cultivation theory. Beginning in the 1960s, scientists began studying the effects of media consumption and the rate at which it was consumed. High volumes of consumption began to take effect on viewers, no matter the type of television that they consumed. This study has its effects shown in the modern era as well, as overexposure to media can affect the mental state of its viewers. This overconsumption twists the way that viewers experience the world, and even leads to an effect known as mean world syndrome. This is the experience in which viewers perceive the world as being much more cruel and violent than it actually is. These people assume the world to be less safe and view life as more pessimistic than others. Part of this theory is that television and media cultivate culture as opposed to challenging it. The correlation to V3 is clear, as one of the main themes is the effects of media on those who consume it. The audience, as well as Team Danganronpa, are the ones perpetuating the harmful relationship media has with its audience, as they went on to take inspiration from the fiction of the original games and take it to a whole new level entirely. Tsumugi being the primary shining example, as she appears to have dedicated her entire life to the ultimate real fiction experience. They allowed fiction to inspire reality as opposed to learning from it. This also lines up with the real world, as there are numerous examples of how far the media will go in order to produce an amusing result for audiences. Take the story of Nasubi, for example. A stand-up comedian who entered a lottery which offered the chance to appear on a show. Hoping to make his big break, and unknowing to what this entailed, Nasubi won, and was soon thrown into a small studio apartment-sized living space with next to nothing in it. His clothes were taken from him, with no food for him to eat and no outside communication. He was told that to leave his enclosure, he had to enter and win sweepstakes. Anything he won, he was allowed to keep, and once the value of what he had won reached the amount of 1 million yen, he would be allowed to leave. After spending 355 days in solitude, Nasubi had won his freedom. Or so he had thought. He would soon be forced to live in solitude once again and recreate the same scenario. Why was he allowed to be held that long, and why was he forced to do it again? The answers are simple. The ratings for his torture were through the roof. The viewership for the terrors Nasubi endured were among the highest numbers Japan had ever seen. Once he was finally finished, it said that his social skills had deteriorated to a pitiful degree. He also found that he could not wear clothes comfortably, as he had been naked for so long. If you're interested in the full story, I highly recommend this video by Atrocity Guide. Link is in the bio. V3 doesn't just look at this relationship in a negative lens, as the final moments of the game delve into the positive effects fiction can have on reality. Shuichi, Maki, and Himiko all find their resolve to face the world, no matter what lay ahead for them. They are technically both parts fiction and reality, as they have lived these so-called fictional experiences, and have proof of their existence moving forward as new people. This concept mingles with the other theme of truth and lies, to show that despite fiction overriding some people's connection with the real world, it can also inspire people to do wonderful things and live their lives. I want you to take a second and consider a piece of media that has truly resonated with you. How did this make you feel, and did it help you as a person? Did you learn something about yourself, or make a change? Something that helped your identity in some way, maybe. This is one end of the relationship fiction can have on reality, and it is demonstrated through V3's final moments. Our heroes went through tremendous tragedy and struggled to make it where they are, but they were able to do so and find that strength to live due to their experience. The themes that are analyzed and brought to their logical endpoint are but one of the many successes found in V3's finale. Another one of these successes is the level of character development seen. How each of these final players express themselves and their transformations from the beginning to the ending of the game. Each character has their own reaction to the truth of their fate, each falling back to square one as they react in a manner they would have at the start. Himiko reacts with constant denial, rejecting any possibility that everything has been a lie. Maki resorts to violence and rude outbursts. Kibo shuts down as he tries to comprehend it all, and Shuichi lashes out before he completely breaks down, feeling as if he's the same helpless crybaby that he was in the beginning. Progressively, though, each one of these characters find the resolve to fight back in order to end the killing game. I want to take a second and briefly analyze each one of our core players here, just to demonstrate how excellent they evolve. Starting with Kibo, who began the story as a naive robot boy who fell for obvious tricks. He grew over the course of the story, learning how to stand up for himself and make his own decisions. What helps further showcase his growth as a character is when the script is flipped, showing that the audience from the real world has been using him as a vessel to experience the killing game. His final decision to stand his ground and destroy the academy that held the games represents the progress he made. as Kiba was an idle figure without a backbone, now committing to the ultimate sacrifice as he ends Danganronpa alongside his classmates once and for all, embodying the hopes of those who had perished and those who stand in at the final trial. Kiba truly becomes the ultimate hope. The decision to have Kiba destroy the Academy also stands as a superb finale to the series as a whole, symbolically closing off the place where the killing game was allowed to thrive, leaving nothing left behind. Maki and Himiko both display an immense amount of growth throughout the story as well. The pair's growth is also extremely similar to one another. Maki begins as a cold, shut-off character who sticks to herself. She makes it clear that she isn't trying to create bonds with anyone. Due to her tragic backstory, Maki believes that life is better lived by remaining closed off and going through the motions. Despite this, internally, Maki is a sensitive and caring person who tries her best to avoid anyone getting hurt. This is part of why she tries to remain isolated as well. During the story, she slowly begins to come out of her shell as she grows closer to Shuichi and Kaito, the latter of whom it is even indicated that she held romantic feelings toward, even if they were never acknowledged by Kaito himself. With the time she spends with the duo, Maki becomes more comfortable with bonding. However, she still maintains that tendency to be less vocal and emotional, preferring to say less than is needed. Upon reaching the finale, Maki has grown the will to stand alongside her remaining classmates as she wants to end the game just as much as they do. Despite all of the horrors she witnessed, even losing Kaito, whom she was very close to, Maki doesn't want to see anyone else she cares about die, even if it means sacrificing herself. Paralleling this is Himiko, a character who, at first glance, seems to have had a primarily inactive role when compared to the others she stands with. And while she may not have had as much focus on her as the previously mentioned characters, she still displays an excellent amount of development from the beginning to the end. A character who does everything she can to live in a fantasy world, rejecting even the title of her ultimate talent, claiming she is a mage and not a magician. Himiko tries to pretend that she is larger than life and not afraid of her surroundings. She tries to lower the tensions around her by lightening the mood, and even on one occasion putting on an entire magic show. She does everything she can to sell her persona of the ultimate mage. Throughout the game, Himiko grows close with Tenko Chabashira and Anji Yonaga, the former being exceptionally drawn to Himiko from the start of the game. Himiko initially tried to push Tenko off and was visibly annoyed, but progressively came to find a soft spot for her. All of this came tumbling down during Chapter 3, where both of these characters are murdered, leaving Himiko once again defenseless and alone. During the trial for this chapter, we are treated to both Shuichi and Kokichi coming to Himiko and helping her through her emotions. Shuichi tells her to not let these deaths be in vain, and that the trials they're going through aren't just so that they can live, but so that the others can be honored as well, trying to share the sentiment he himself has had to learn. Meanwhile, Kokichi comes to her side in a roundabout and peculiar way, as is the method he takes for most things. He brings up how she's such a fraud as she's always lying, only to expose that she keeps her emotions tightly locked away, and she's eventually going to break from it. Despite this seeming harsh and overly critical, it's clear from Oma's own character that this is from a point of concern. From that point forward, players can notice Himiko slowly come out of her shell more and more. And when the final trial comes around, Himiko stands boldly with the others. Her loss and motivation parallel that of Maki. Both have lost those that they were the closest to. Both are full of fear and despair in the face of the truth, but they have no choice left but to fight. Lastly, we can look at the excellent development of our main character, Shuichi Saihara. As the ultimate detective, Shuichi is a natural fit for protagonist in the Danganronpa series. At first glance, it would almost seem too perfect, as he would have the skills to investigate and solve these cases easier than the other protagonist. However, this is given an intriguing twist as his personality interferes with his prominent skills. Shuichi subverts what one would expect the ultimate detective to be, especially when compared to the previous ultimate detective, Kyoko Kirigiri. Shuichi begins the story incredibly reserved and timid, often trying to hide himself away. During the first chapter of the game, where Kaede is still the main character, we see Shuichi simply follow her lead. He doesn't stand out and often mutters to himself about the details of everything. His intuition is shown off during this initial chapter though, as he points out things that would have not been obvious to Kaede, such as the hidden door to the library. This same hidden door that turns out to be critically important to the final chapter. When it's time for the first trial, he is accused of being the culprit and struggles to defend himself due to both his meek personality and the knowledge that he has. Burdened by the knowledge that Kaede is the guilty one, Shuichi remains silent, which ultimately leads to Kaede revealing herself. This fear to confront the truth is reflected by Shuichi's backstory, where he tells Kaede that he worked alongside his uncle at his detective agency. There, the two worked together on cases. One case ultimately changed Shuichi's entire life perspective, though. He solved a murder case quicker than the police did. However, this case was more complex than he had thought. As it turned out, the murderer he found was taking revenge on a man who had driven his family to suicide. This made Shuichi question his morals, as he sided with the victim to solve the case when in reality, that victim had been a horrible man. After this, Shuichi began to hide away from exposing the truth and began to wear a hat to hide his eyes, trying to avoid the gaze of others, mirroring his trauma from the gaze of the man who he turned in. After Kaede's execution plays out, an important development can be seen beginning in Shuichi, as Kaito punches him and asks why he didn't stand up for Kaede. Shuichi then goes to Kaede's ultimate research lab, where he listens to Claire de Lune, a song that she had previously mentioned that she would like to play for him. During this short reprieve, Shuichi begins his character arc of overcoming his fears and dedicates himself to ending this killing game. By utilizing his detective talent, he takes it upon himself to be the one who must stand for those who have been killed. As this is a Danganronpa game, finding out the mastermind behind it all is no small task. So this sets Shuichi on the trail of the mastermind while trying to navigate those who are killing. I'd also like to give credit to Danganronpa for showcasing his skills as a detective. Throughout the game, Shuichi uses his intuition, gathers evidence, and forms logical conclusions based off of facts he uncovers. He doesn't miraculously know things. He follows a process and is able to demonstrate his talent as a detective. Aside from the case of what circumstances led him and his classmates here standing in his way, is his own fear of facing the truth, which is beautifully brought together through the finale of the game, where he is faced with the ultimate truth of his situation. A truth that he hadn't even considered due to the sheer impossibility of it. And even in spite of how heavy the burden may be on his shoulders, Shuichi still maintains his calm composure by asking Tsumugi if she has any evidence to refute her being the mastermind. Here is where Shuichi's character arc reaches its peak. Despite all that he had been through, and all of the growth he underwent, he failed. The futility of all that he had been through sets in. That same familiar tune Kaede mentioned to Shuichi begins to play as he stands in utter defeat. Nothing he fought for was real. Not even his own existence was real. It was all in vain. As the screen pans in on the portrait of Kaede, it fades to black. But this is not the end. Shuichi rises up with the help of Kibo and then the rest of his classmates. The culmination of the suffering all of them have been through gives them the strength they need to stand together. There is a sense of poetic justice here too, as Shuichi is but one of the many characters fabricated by Team Danganronpa, given the talent of Ultimate Detective. Now using that talent that was implanted into him to dismantle the killing game and end Danganronpa. Shuichi states this confidently, symbolizing the victory he and the others reached over Tsumugi and Team Danganronpa. The decision to have each of the survivors make the decision to give up their lives in order to prevent further killing is such a strong and bold choice, both in line with their development up to this point, as well as being a beautiful and strong decision for the story. A bold decision, so bold in fact that not many stories would dare tread that territory. At least, not within the world of gaming. Another fantastic aspect of V3's finale that truly brings everything together is how the gameplay is implemented. Due to the game being a visual novel with some mini-games sprinkled in, creating an engaging finale took some work on the developer's behalf. But they pulled through and overcame this challenge by putting a twist on the existing formula, much like the other elements that make this finale so great. First off, take the shifting perspective that the second half of the trial gives us. Each of the surviving characters is playable during this final showdown. This helps to represent their willingness to sacrifice themselves in order to end Danganronpa, giving these characters a sense of agency. First shown by having Kibo rally the others away from their despair-induced state, then by having everyone cooperate with Shuichi, making the player feel like they're in unison with the cast as they make the incredibly daunting decision to take their own lives to end the killing game. Another way the gameplay is merged with the plot in this finale is how the trial makes use of the various minigames that are used to proceed with the trial. In rapid succession, each one is thrown at the player as Monokuma tries to force Shuichi to cooperate with the game. During these, players are meant to fail or to not play them at all, representing Shuichi's steadfast decision to no longer give in to hope or despair. These fun spins on the groundwork of the game push the boundary of the conventional experience, helping players to feel just as involved as the characters in the game. Before we close out, I think it's important to address some of the content in the finale. The information that is given to players during the final trial is a bit confusing at first glance, as players have to navigate the reveals, emotions, and follow the story. From Tsumugi, what was true? And what was just misinformation in order to provoke the cast into falling to despair? It's a bit difficult to truly pinpoint each truth and each lie, but I believe that's the intention behind the confusion. The final trial was designed in a way to work alongside the theme that is the line between truth and lies, by having some of the information be ambiguous. This allows players to come to their own conclusions and speculate. However, make no mistake and assume that this finale is mocking or chiding its players. V3 stands in its own clear place, leaving these decisions up to the player's interpretation. Even taking a look at interviews with those involved with the series will tell you that. To help further my argument, here's a bit from an interview with Yoshinori Terasawa, producer of the Danganronpa series. This work can also be interpreted in various ways, and it is also true that even our staff have different interpretations. Truth and lies are a fine line, two sides of the same coin, and I would be happy if you could enjoy this story until the end and find your own answer. What you feel, what you think, how you interpret and conclude. It's up to each individual to decide. I think that's fine. There are some definitive truths, such as Danganronpa being a television show. This is due to the fact that there is some form of evidence to back this up. Players are shown the audience at home watching. But there are other elements that are vague, like the claim that Tsumugi makes that every element was scripted to the T. Due to the cast showcasing development as the game ran on, and even the moments of introspection we see from Shuichi, it's impossible to say with certainty that she did script it all. She could have guided elements of the game to her favor, but no amount of fiction was able to take away the emotion and experiences of those involved. And the final trial shows this firsthand, as Shuichi and the others come face to face with their lived experiences. The perfection of this finale is assisted by this mystery, as it can lead down a rabbit hole of discussion. For example, who was Tsumugi Shirogane really? Did she brainwash herself before partaking in the game as the ultimate cosplayer? Did she exist beforehand? It could be argued that her entire persona was made up to make the game more interesting. In the final moments before Kibo destroys the academy, it's worth noting that Tsumugi says how she can hold her head high as a cosplay cat criminal, which gives way to even more speculation. Did she copy another mastermind? Could this game actually take place within the universe of Danganronpa 1 and 2? It's impossible to say for sure, but that's what makes this a perfect finale. Another aspect that is up for debate are the audition tapes shown to Shuichi to further his descent into despair. As the prologue to the game recounts a different story, Kaede explicitly remembers being kidnapped, and this is shown before the first flashback light is used. If her, Kaito, and Shuichi all willingly signed on for the game, then what was the point of kidnapping them? These facets all give credence to the theme of truth, lies, and fiction, making for an interesting conclusion, one that continues the mysteries left behind from the game. Moving on to another part of V3's finale, a large amount of fan backlash was directed to the decision to have the original series be fictional. It's important to note that this is only the case within the context of V3. These games still exist in their own shared universe, and nothing V3 does can change that. What V3 does with the previous games is use them to create that meta-narrative, one that players of the series will be able to acknowledge. The canon of Danganronpa 1 and 2 still exists. Take them as a bubble, one that exists in a larger bubble that is V3, and V3 exists as its own bubble to us. It's a bit complicated, but I figured including this explanation should help those who didn't enjoy what V3 did to understand why it used them in the way it did. Moreover, whether or not the original games are fiction shouldn't dampen your enjoyment. Your time spent with those stories is just as real as the feelings that they invoked. The nature in which V3's final chapter is handled aids in its perfect execution. The truth being progressively unveiled as Shuichi reopens the first trial of the game allows for the tension to rise as they close in on the mastermind. Going over the initial events of the game with new eyes recontextualizes the plot while revealing new information for the player. The trial is grounded with little spectacle, which allows for a deeper connection to be built. Players are able to see and feel the emotions alongside the cast. Shuichi confronts Tsumugi along with the others as she switches disguises and cuts them off as they try to refute her claims. Danganronpa is known for its frantic talk battles, but nowhere is it stronger than in this finale. The bold decisions and claims aren't juxtaposed by the wild elements the series is known for. Rather, they're played completely serious, which allows the unsettling truth to permeate both players and the characters. The final moments of the game, where Shuichi and the others rise from the rubble of the now destroyed academy that they've been kept in, are among the most beautiful moments in gaming, as it shows that whatever the truth is of who they are, they exist, they survived, and that's all that matters. With one foot in fiction and one foot in reality, they are able to exist in both realms. And this is just as true when looking at the game from our perspective. In our world and theirs, this story isn't real, but that doesn't take away the time spent or suddenly make it pointless. Jumping back to the section where I covered Kibo, the final action of destroying the academy is a remarkable choice to end the game on, as it symbolizes not just the destruction of the place where tragedy occurred, but also the end of Danganronpa as a whole. With the final screen of the game being the words Danganronpa shattering, everything comes to an end. And it's during these closing moments, players can take in everything that the game has thrown their way. The emotional highs and lows, the blurry line between truth and lies, and the influence fiction can have on reality. Danganronpa V3 tells you that sometimes the truth hurts, and the journey to finding that truth may be rough, lengthy, emotionally draining. The road may not be as straightforward as one may think, but once you find that truth, it's what you do with it that is the most important thing. V3 says that no matter what is fact, no matter what is fiction, you yourself are in control of your life. So face the world and give it everything you've got. Wow, this is something that took me a long time to put together. So if you stuck to the end, then thank you so much. If you've enjoyed the video, then if you can take a second to like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff, then it'd mean the world to me. Danganronpa V3 is one of the best pieces of media I've ever experienced, so I really wanted to do my best to do it justice and express how it captivated me. I hope I did a good job, and I hope everything was enjoyable. Again, thank you for the support, and thank you for watching this far. It's been Noyah, and I'll see you next time.